All right, so welcome back, everybody, for Unit 2. This time around, we're going to be talking about the agricultural revolution, aka where did all this food come from? So, supplemental viewing for this unit, as always, Crash Course is going to be involved. Khan Academy is always going to be recommended. Some other good links are on there, some are shorter than others. But this is a well covered topic. So, with about 10 seconds of searching, you should be able to find a plethora of other resources about the Neolithic Revolution. Just be careful about where you're getting your information from. There's, also a lot of garbage on the internet. So make sure you're aware. All right, so let's start off by talking about what is the agricultural or Neolithic revolution, right? Neolithic meaning new stone. Um, this is the period where we start to develop beyond the simple handheld stone tools and the things that had limited us during the Paleolithic Revolution. So when we're talking about the agricultural revolution, we're talking about a period from roughly about 14,000 to up until about 4,000 years ago. The real beginning of this revolution is when the Ice Age ends, like we said at the end of the last unit. That presents a warmer climate, that presents melting polar ice caps, more water is in circulation, more water is the rain cycle. And since water equals life, you get greater plant and animal abundance. So, those hunter gatherer bands that we talked about in the last unit, those kinship groups of about 25 or so, begin to settle down into permanent spots to take advantage of all of the new plant and animal life. So, as the years pass and as these hunter gatherers get familiar with their environments, they begin to develop technology for harvesting these wild plant species. Things like the sickle, like the hoe or the digging stick, crude shovels. Eventually, further on down the line, we're going to develop the plow as well. But not only that, more importantly, we develop a very intimate knowledge of the local plant and animal life. And using that newly developed technology, as well as our friend fire, we begin to figure out that if we wipe out certain unwanted species of plants or wipe out certain unwanted species of animals, that helps to make more room in our environment for the helpful species. If we prefer to have a lot of cattle because, they really provide a lot of meat, or we prefer to have a lot of blueberries because they provide a lot of nutrition, well, if we get rid of the things that destroy cattle or blueberries, that's going to be advantageous for us. Now, once we begin to figure these things out, we begin to have greater amounts of them. We begin to accumulate surplus. And those early exchange networks, which in the last unit had stretched tens of miles and were very localized, we dealt mainly with surrounding settlements. Those early exchange networks tend to be busier. There's more goods and more people moving along them, which means that this early technology and this early semi agricultural knowledge begins to diffuse along them as well. Um, as we become more efficient foragers, our population begins to grow because there's more food at our disposal. More food equals more babies. That's going to be a theme that you're going to hear from me about 50 times during this course of this class. More food equals more babies. When we have better caloric intake, we have the energy to, do the deed as well as food to feed those new population. So, population's growing. Eventually, you're going to meet a critical mass, right? There are going to be food pressures. How are all of these people going to get fed? So, over the course of thousands of years, and keep in mind, this was no immediate overnight thing. This developed over a very long period of time in many different places around the world, not simultaneously. But we begin to develop agriculture and we begin to develop domestication, right? So make sure you know the definition of those two words if you don't. So agriculture and domestication, especially domestication, is a very slow and it is a very selective process over thousands of years. Okay. This is the selecting and the taming of the more docile animals that we feel are going to be advantageous to us. The dog, for example, to aid us in hunting, to help protect us from other wilder animals. Cattle, pigs, chickens, sheep, goats, right? Animals that can produce something that we need, whether it's meat, whether it's wool, leather, these kinds of things. These are the animals that we selected because we were able to extensively breed and crossbreed them until we got a version of the animal that was docile, that was willing to be essentially held captive by us, and allow us to train them, to harness them for labor, and eventually, slaughter them for meat. But animals aren't the only thing that we domesticate. We do the exact same thing with crops. In the reading, there was a really excellent example of the teosinte grass from Mesoamerica, which over tens of thousands of years, native Mesoamericans were able to breed this grass. They were able to plant and replant, throwing away less productive versions of it and replanting more productive versions, until they were able to grow this grass from a seed, which is, under an inch, to an actual full size corn cob that could give us actual decent caloric intake. And again, we do this by breeding and crossbreeding animals, weeding out the underperforming breeds and the underperforming seeds. So as we spend thousands upon thousands of years of doing this, we begin to see several specific plants and several specific breeds of animals that are willing to be tamed by us. They are willing to produce in large numbers the things that we need. And we are doing this independently in multiple environments across several thousand years. For the most part, it really depends on just the locality of resources. The plants that exist naturally in that area that are cooperative and that are able to be domesticated really depend on what you have at hand. Again, there aren't massive trade networks. You're not seeing, wheat travel thousands and thousands of miles to sub-Saharan Africa. You're not seeing cassava leave Africa and move to India yet. Okay, that's going to take some really big advances in technology before we're able to transport things those kinds of miles. So, what you see here is a quick rough map of some of the early domesticated plants, the early domesticated animals, and the regions that they come out of. Those of you from AP Human Geography will recognize this concept. These are essentially the hearths, right? Hopefully, everybody remembers the idea and the concept of a hearth. But these are where these certain domesticated animals are birthed, I guess you could say, for lack of a better reason. Um, these are the areas where they migrate out of. And we, you know, basically enable these animals to become some of the dominant species in the area because they become favorable to us. A lot of these species are not ones that would survive in the wild, but because of their usefulness to us, and because of the fact that we're willing to domesticate them and breed them in large numbers, they become the favored species. And then as travel and as trade begins to get bigger and more extensive throughout the years, these animals and these plants begin to diffuse even further. Um, if you're interested, there is an excellent book by Jared Diamonds called Germs, Guns, and Steel. And it looks at the importance of these domesticate hearths and the available resources in Eurasia versus the Americas, and the importance of them in determining kind of which continent and which groups of people become the dominant ones on the planet. It talks a lot about what's lacking in the Americas as far as, heavy duty labor animals such as, cattle, horses, these kinds of things that simply were not available to Native Americans, whereas Eurasians had them and therefore tended to have more productive societies. And then when the two sides come into contact, it gives the Eurasian people a massive advantage when it comes to conflict with Native American people. So, if you're interested in that, I really recommend the book. I'm pretty sure it's in the school library. It's called Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's by Jared Diamond. Fantastic book, probably one of the favorite ones I've ever read. So, that's it for part one of this. We'll come back with part two and we'll talk about why we chose agriculture and what's the downside of it.